Good day to all thinking people. We're broadcasting another podcast on our channel. Today, we're discussing the global chaos through the lens of philosophy, or, you could say, through rational melancholy, that state when everything seems clear, but it doesn't make life any easier, and the depth of it is measured by the degree of weariness with the world around us. Let's go. Some people don't like change, but you have to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. Or just building a rocket and leaving. Elon Musk. The old world order creaks as if it's finally being recognized for what it's always been. An agreement between people who believed rules were magic and institutions were talismans against chaos. It's been called many things. The Yalta-Potsdam system, rules-based order, the cathedral. I prefer the last. Something sublime. Light in stained glass windows, while outside a draft blew and the rafters creaked. The diagnosis is clear. Liberal democracy is tired of its own promises. Its guardians, universities, NGOs, the media, are losing credibility faster than they can muster arguments, and people who don't discuss the cathedral's architecture are taking center stage. They're testing how easily it catches fire. The parade of autocrats resembles a chronological table. Some call the past the uniform of Europe's gendarme. Others dream of their own Middle Eastern court with Ottoman ornamentation. Some tailor loyalty and patriotism to fit old epics, and still others reinterpret anti-communism and anti-colonialism and call it sobriety. They all share a common language, the right to exclusivity and a cold disdain for the softness of rules. They put national interests in quotation marks, and then turn these quotation marks into parentheses, into which they carefully place their neighbors. But it would be too easy to blame everything on an overdose of charisma and a lack of liberalism. There's another force, technological, rich, fast, and vulgarly confident, that works not with slogans, but with infrastructure. Let's call it what it likes to call itself, with affection and the rustle of money, the techno-oligarchy. People for whom move fast and break things isn't a slogan, but an internal metric, have transferred the startup method to society. They don't criticize institutions, they simply design a world in which they can't breathe. Their religion is decentralization, their ethics is efficiency, their politics is controlled chaos. And they need old politicians, those who live in historical bronze, not as teachers, but as avatars, temporary bearers of the will to dismantle. This showcase perfectly accommodates familiar names. Those who are fascinated by the theory of mosaic states, who don't particularly believe in competition, preferring monopoly as an honest form of power, who see big data as a predictive tool rather than the temptation of a panopticon. This isn't a dark conspiracy, it's industrial culture elevated to a political function. As a result, the old world is breaking down in two places at once. From above, it is being crushed by a caste of leaders who love politics as a force geometry. From below, by a class of engineer rulers who have learned to transform the dream sheet into a norm. The autocrat loses the need for propaganda when the algorithm more accurately writes fate. The technocrat loses the need for philosophy when code elegantly justifies exceptions to the rule. They meet at the same point, where globalism is declared an outdated myth, and patchwork, mosaic, governance, the natural future. A multitude of independent mini-states, corporatized as services, where sovereignty is a license and citizenship a subscription. In this picture, democratic institutions appear not dangerous, but simply interfering. They should not be destroyed, they should be made incompatible with the main system. What was called regulation yesterday is now described as a break. Digital infrastructure is transforming the population into a transparent mass. No names, no faces, only identifiers, behavioral patterns, and social capital. Wonderful, say the new architects, because it's predictable. Convenient, say those for whom predictability is a form of power. Experience is no longer hidden. The software that helped intelligence agencies see more than the human eye is permitted to see has become a showcase for predictive analytics. The idea of universal competition has been replaced by a careful pursuit of monopoly. Cryptocurrencies, which promised freedom from banking compliance, have in reality become a haven for shady practices, not because the technology is evil, but because that's how greed works. Decentralization without ethics is simply a desynchronization of control. The strong retreat into the shadows of anonymity. The weak remain in the spotlight of law-abidingness. Freedom on display, unaccounted goods in the warehouse. This same logic transforms the mass, not into a social subject, but into economic fuel. The new economy isn't about employing everyone. It wants a select few to become a beautiful statistical error, entitled to a basic income and maximum screen time. Writers have long described this montage, from steam locomotives powered by human fuel to miniature biodiesel engines made from the wide masses. The polite word for this is stratification. The impolite one is a casting call for the right to be a person with options. There will always be a place for the right ones. The wrong ones will remain a role in a database. Lest anyone get the illusion that the tech oligarchy exists on its own, and politics simply exploits its products, let's consider how they operate. The political project of authoritarian revival happily adopts the habits of a startup. Speed is more important than inspections. Deregulation is more important than security. Inspirational speeches replace boring reports, and the end result is infrastructure that manipulates time and space. Beautifully put. In reality, this isn't about physics, it's about logistics, about reduced supply chain friction, about algorithms that speed up decision-making, about platforms that replace states precisely where states once had monopolies. Add to this mix gigantic state programs worth ₹500 billion, private contractors with experience in linking defense and big tech, the lifting of restrictions where ethics at least demanded a pause, and the picture becomes clear. We're building a machine that will destroy distances but increase the distances between people. It's not as if all these declarations are empty. In some places, gateways are indeed emerging, supercomputer clusters and clouds. Individual industries are embracing AI as if it were a new operating system. Quantum projects promise breakthroughs. Biotechnology accelerates processes as if nature had agreed to live by a sprint schedule. But at the same time, old sins are resurfacing in a new interface. Where cooperation is needed, tariff wars emerge. Where alliance trust is needed, technological ecosystem disintegration occurs. Where the common good is needed, national data militarization is intensifying. Europe feels ill at ease under the American umbrella of big data. China is happily upgrading its own governance model with quasi-market discipline of algorithms. The Global South sees itself excluded from the future by default and is choosing the closest alternative available. This machine has a philosophical problem. It believes rationality is sufficiently pure to limit itself. We know how this ends. Civilization loves to explain that order is humane, but each time it refines its schemes to such a level of bluntness that the human element falls out. The direct heir to this logic is AI biopolitics. Predictability is a virtue, transparency is an obligation, correction is hygiene. The ideal citizen is not free, but convenient. The state is not caring, but predictive. Justice is not fair, but correctly calibrated. At this point, technological utopianism turns into an infrastructure of controllability, where every glitch is not a reason to ask why, but a signal for punishment. There's also a more pragmatic flaw. When the infrastructure of the future is assembled using national tariffs and amid geopolitical threats, the cost of the dream becomes so high that it's cheaper to stylize it as animation. Technically, we'll achieve a lot, but politically, we'll pay for it with isolation, and economically, with costs that will eat into the promised efficiency. Manipulating time and space is only possible if you have cheap energy, accessible supply chains, peaceful capital markets, and allies who aren't afraid you'll sell them a digital collar tomorrow under the guise of security services. You see, it's all simpler on the poster. The new ethics of efficiency demands one simple concession: don't interfere. From this concession emerges an entire school of permitted irresponsibility. If an algorithm shows a correlation, so be it. If the data collects itself, it means it wanted to be collected. If the system handles extreme cases with an error, it means extreme cases are the price of greater opportunities. This is where the useless class is born, people whose irrelevance has been carefully calculated. This is also where what was once called a simulacrum occurs. A sign of the future seems more valuable than the future, and simply showing it is enough to quietly change the rules. When a storefront is trusted more than a warehouse, oversight ceases to be a modest function and becomes a sovereign passion. AI doesn't liberate, it distributes responsibility so that no one but the platform owners feels it. Returning to the avatars of the techno-oligarchy, the political figures of chaos. These people have no algorithms, they have an instinct. To undermine where institutions still hold, to drive a wedge where norms can still protect. Managed chaos is not improvisation, it is too systematically repeated in different countries to be accidental. It destroys trust in advance, only to then propose power without consultation, as the only way to restore order. This works in a world where pluralism is tired of its own noise. Chaos is prepared, and then carefully bought in the format of a strong solution. One engages in hybrid wars and nuclear blackmail, the other, in a dreary, psychotic admiration for someone else's dictatorship and a disdainful attitude toward their own media. They are not friends. They are co-performers, each in their own genre, but the common soundtrack is, first we'll break it, then we'll explain that there is no other way. And this is where techno-oligarchies find themselves especially comfortable. When policy is made with a touch of managed disorder, control and prediction technologies easily become a service of common sense. Digital policing sounds like security, data segregation sounds like service personalization, labor displacement sounds like increased productivity, and the militarization of artificial intelligence sounds like ensuring sovereignty. Each of these concepts has an honest aspect. The problem is that the honest aspect doesn't require total scale, and total scale inevitably devours honesty. This is how rationality becomes a factory of insensitivity, and bureaucracy becomes a machine that doesn't care who it grinds, as long as everything is formally correct. This logic won't stop at the border. If something is built, it will be stolen, copied, reverse engineered. Any authoritarian regime with access to engineering and discipline will easily adopt the best practices of the future, especially if the future is uneasy about defending its own moral boundaries. And then the perfect combination: AI for predictability, 5G for instantaneous control, quantum for hacking and locking, will fall into the hands of those who would happily tear down the last bridges between security and violence. Technological exports have always been sold as soft power. In reality, they often prove harder than tanks, simply because tanks are visible. Against this backdrop, inspirational letters edited to resemble historical examples appear, and speeches appear in which technologies promise to compress space, stretch growth, and manage productivity like household lighting. One of the ideologists of the new wave declares that time can now be scrolled with your fingers, as if on a CD player. And in a sense, yes, logistics have accelerated, synchronization has become the norm, infrastructure holds more than before. But we still live in a world of energy constraints, political cycles, and human limitations, not in presentation. The power of such speeches lies not in precision, but in the myth. They turn technological progress into a moral superiority. And here, what matters is not what is possible, but what we are allowed to turn a blind eye to. How to respond to this is a question with no easy answers. One could, of course, offer the same recipe that liberal democracy has been repeating for 100 years: strengthen institutions, protect the culture of facts, and prevent rationality from turning into a cold mechanism that knows no one by name. This is both possible and necessary, otherwise, the patchwork quilt will turn out not to be a sofa on which to comfortably read newspapers, but a map of fiefdoms between which data flows and people stand at the borders. But this is not enough. We need to restore a sense of moral method to engineering, not the crutches of AI ethics, with checklists, but a ban on the temptation of total control. We must recognize that speed is a characteristic, not a virtue. That deregulation is a tool, not a religion. That efficiency, without human value, is merely a neat way to forget the superfluous. Technonationalism loves the story of the New Apollo and New Manhattan. It's a beautiful story. There's a collective goal, the tension of science, the glory of landing. But those projects shared a common framework. They didn't promise that after them, everything could be accomplished without humans. Today's version, privatized, insured against failure, armed to the teeth, promises the opposite. Humans are needed until the system learns to do without them. On this path, it's truly easy to manipulate time and space, especially human time and the living space of others. If you don't want to end up figuring out what kind of Trump the world wants, because the world prefers simple leaders and quick fixes, you'll have to do something boring and unimpressive. Stop chaos from being sold as courage, and techno-oligarchies as common sense. Don't ban technology, ban the simulation of meaning. Don't shut down platforms, cut off applause when a platform passes off power as a service. Don't turn citizens into transparent users, reserve the right to be opaque. And remember this simple thing. Civilizations don't perish from a lack of speed, they perish from moral laziness. The idea of a patchwork reality seems tempting until you notice that each piece sews its own police force, its own court, its own reality filter, and the threads are held together by the same knot, a private power, confident it knows better. It's truly possible to live in this world, some as winners, others as statistics. Some will gain access to anonymity, others to honest poverty. Some will design the future, while others will be left voting in an interface that dismisses voice as noise. And all of this will look like progress, because it's beautiful, fast, and has the right font. Sometimes I feel like our era isn't a battle of ideologies, but a debate about the right to slow down. Liberal democracy isn't good at racing other people's cars, but it's good at saying, wait, when everyone wants, already. The techno-oligarchy and its political avatars abhor pauses. A pause is someone else's jurisdiction, someone else's oversight, someone else's right to ask, why? But all human freedom is precisely the right to why, a stubborn why that grates on the nerves of any economic model. If we give it up, we'll be left with a beautiful car in which we'll one day wake up as a statistical error. And no stained glass windows, only the neat, steady light of the panels, which doesn't flicker even when the cathedral has long been deserted. Give the podcast a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you found it interesting and want more podcasts like this one that explore the global chaos that surrounds us, and be sure to leave a comment if you have any questions or just something to say. Peace to all.